they'll still be confused. But all right. Hey, Steve. Howdy.
Hey.
Hey. Hey, Steve. So we got a little technical problem here, so we'll try to work that through. I've got to. I'm going to pause the YouTube video piece, but so here's some of the confusion: is we've got an old bad link in the notice for people to, yeah. So there's a bad link for the live broadcast. So right now we're just trying to fix that. So give us a couple minutes and we'll.
Yeah, we had to start a new event page. So if you went to the original link, you're going to be on a dead event page, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There were some errors in the event page, the first event page that was created, and we don't know what caused it. So that's the reason.
Murphy's Law. So I'll go back to the, I'm going to go back to the original. First of all, I want to correct it, try to correct it in Facebook. So linking in from Facebook. So let me try to get there. First, Owings Art. Okay. Let's see if I can edit this. So kind of the magic is being made here in the background. Sorry about that. It also could be, Steve, because I promoted the event. So when you do that, it might lock you out from trying to change the.
It could be. Who knows?
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the event altogether. And then YouTube can take my, or Facebook can take my money. And we'll see how it goes from there. So sorry about that, folks, as we just try to get this worked out so that people can get to the right link. Is Val in there, though?
Yeah, she's in there. Hey, Val. She says everything looks good.
Okay. So if there's any way Val can help, like let people know on the other page that we're in here, can she go to the original page? Let me share this. Yes.
Somebody says, are we ignoring the hat?
Yeah, we are ignoring that. Look, it's cold here in my studio. It's freezing. It's Minnesota, you know. It's actually pretty nice day today, but for some reason my whole world is cold right now. So in the basement. Yeah, it's crazy. So I'm going to just put link to live event. Link to live event. And we can get started, I think.
Hello, everybody. That's just joining. We're having technical difficulties, which is why we're kind of staring oddly at the screens.
Hey! Who's that crazy guy in the weird hat? Okay, let's see. Here we go.
Jacqueline Stevens said she got the link for this one from the original YouTube page.
Really? Okay. Oh, maybe she was in the chat. Was she in the chat?
Yeah, it was. We put it in the chat. Did you get it in the chat, Jacqueline? We tried to send people over here to the new event.
All right, I think we're good, Steve. We can probably get started.
Val said no one's in the other live, so.
Okay, well, sorry for the technical difficulties.
Trial by fire, Marty.
Heck yeah. The best way to have a trial is by fire, you know. So anyway, it's I'm Marty Owings from owingsart.com, and I'm joined by the honorable and esteemed Mr. Steve Mitchell from the Mind of Watercolor. So all you minders out there, I gotta loosen up my hat here a little bit. Looks kind of weird when it's just like this, but so all the minders from the Mind of Watercolor, hey, welcome to this live event where we're going to talk about all things watercolor tonight. So we're really excited. Steve and I have been planning this for quite a number of weeks, and so we've got some good stuff lined up. I hope you enjoy it. So Steve, welcome aboard.
Hey, Marty. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Excited about this. I don't know if you have this on auto camera switch or not.
Yep, people should be able to see you when you speak.
Okay,
No
I
problem.
still only see you, but that may just be me.
Okay.
Can you see me now while I'm talking?
Affirmative.
Great.
All right.
Well, so we're going to talk about the big foundation, the first foundation for watercolor, and that's watercolor paper.
Because without
that was my first video, Marty. My first video on YouTube was about choosing good paper.
You know, that seems like a long time ago now, but when I think about where you are now from where you started, and I think I was with you almost from the beginning, but I think I saw you posted today that you got something in the mail in December from YouTube. Can you show people that, Steve?
Oh, well, yeah. Hold on a second. Thanks for mentioning.
Yeah, we didn't plan this. I just putting Steve on the spot because I saw that today he got some really cool award from YouTube. Go ahead, Steve. Lay it on us, baby.
Yeah, I actually got this a little before Christmas, which so was a great Christmas present. I've just been looking for the opportunity to share it, and so put that on Facebook and Instagram earlier today. It's my silver play button from YouTube.
Isn't that cool?
So, yeah, I celebrated. We went out to eat. I think it was like second week of December or something. No, it was fun. We went out to eat and celebrate, and I've been looking for the right place to hang it on the wall, but you know, I owe this to all my great viewers. Minders are the best.
That's unbelievable. And if you're ever like desperate for cash or you get poor, you can just melt that thing down. It's 100% silver, I'm sure.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm afraid to look inside. It might be plastic.
Well, so
but anyway, that's
well, congratulations on that, Steve. That's a heck of an achievement and really awesome.
A lot of work went into it, but also a lot of fantastic viewers. So, you know, I never imagined, and I really mean this, I never imagined when I started YouTube, I'd heard so many horror stories, you know, for trolls and bad. I just never imagined the fantastic group of viewers I was going to get. It continues to, you know, 3.5 years later, it continues to blow my mind. So whenever I look at this, that's what I'm reminded of.
And when you think about the number 100,000 and the number of people that represents, I mean, that fills like 2 college stadiums and or a big city. I mean, that's a pretty remarkable achievement, Steve. So congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, tonight we're going to talk about watercolor papers, but I wanted to mention that we'll have a special guest joining us a little later, and we'll bring him in when we can. But for now, we're going to talk about like what does great paper mean to Steve and I. And I'll let Steve kick it off. He's been a watercolorist for more than 30 years, and if you know his channel or if you're familiar with it, you know what kind of a unique and extraordinary talent Steve is when it comes to watercolors. I like to say that Steve is my go-to guy for anything watercolor related, and he likes to ping me on supplies and things. So tonight I'm going to let Steve, let's kick it off with your thoughts on what is a great paper.
Yeah, well, for me, Marty, it boils down, excuse me, to one main thing, and that's 100% cotton. You know, I talk about this. I think everybody who, well, not everybody, but every day, every week at least, I get a comment about paper and people trying, you know, cheaper papers, which usually end up not being 100% cotton. And for me, 100% cotton is the key. Not that you can't paint successfully on something else, but it is the key. I mean, sometimes it's called 100% rag. It just, you know, and when you get into the cheaper grade papers that are cellulose, and that's just wood pulp papers.
Right.
The painting experience changes. It changes dramatically, and really it changes with just about all of them. I mean, there are some that are a little better than others, but
Sure.
cotton paper is just designed to handle the water, the even spread of washes, even drying. It's just better brush techniques, better everything. And so that's what it means to me. And, you know, one of the biggest misnomers today is calling pulp or wood pulp paper or cellulose paper a student grade paper. What it should be called is a value grade paper, because wood pulp paper is anything but student friendly.
Gotcha.
It really takes an experienced watercolorist, I think, to paint well on wood pulp paper.
Okay.
So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, and of course, when you get in the 100% cotton category, you have just myriad brands to choose from, and there are differences in them and preferences, and we'll talk about that. But that's what it means to me.
I should also, yeah, fantastic. I pretty much agree. I should mention that if people want to chat questions in the chat room, we'll take those questions sort of at the end. We'll have a guest come on, and then we'll take some of your questions toward the end of the broadcast. Valerie is in from her what do you call it? How do you pronounce it again, Steve? Pyrography. And she's great. So if you see her in the chat room, and you'll see her right under there, Drawing with Fire. So it's Valerie Cannell, Drawing with Fire. She is the chat room admin for tonight. So she'll be able to take your questions and follow her instructions for how to pose a question in the chat room. That way it'll be easier for us to see it as we go along. And so I know there's a lot of people in there from your channel and mine. And so if we don't say hi right away, it isn't that we're neglecting you. It's maybe that we're just distracted talking about great watercolor paper. With that, I wanted to mention that I think we're going to be joined shortly by our guest, but when he pops in, we'll let you know. So back to the watercolor stuff. So we might have a slight disagreement here, Steve. It's not that often. I mean, I agree with 99% of what you said, but on the one point about cellulose paper, I think there have been tons of improvements in paper over the years, but as you pointed out, cellulose paper is just basically wood pulp paper. It's not going to last as long, and in some ways, as you mentioned, it's much harder to paint on for a beginner. But yet and still, if somebody's on a budget and they can't really afford 100% rag, because although the prices have come down with newer technologies and newer watercolor papers, it's still out of reach for some folks. So if the only way you're going to watercolor paint affordably is to use a cellulose paper, then by all means, don't be afraid of it. You know, buy it. It's fine. It's not going to last 500 years or anything like that. But you know, it's serviceable in the meantime.
Sure. I mean, you know, there's an availability issue, and there are some that are better than others. Difficult because so many of the techniques that I have taught, not all of them, but a lot of them, absolutely cannot be done. Cannot be. I will say that adamantly. Cannot be done on wood pulp paper. There are a lot that can. There are a lot of techniques that can. So you kind of have that dynamic. How you paint is sort of a part of it.
Can you mention like one or two of those techniques, Steve, that you don't think are appropriate for maybe wood pulp paper and that?
Most wood pulp paper will not glaze well. You just cannot layer.
Right.
You can layer a little bit, but as soon as you start layering, that underneath layer just picks right up, and you're just mixing it. It's one of the most frustrating things about wood pulp paper, and it's why, you know, in sketchbooks you kind of paint around that idea. You don't do a lot of layering or glazing in a sketchbook. You know, you just kind of paint alla prima and just go for it, and you kind of learn, and that's just it. You kind of have to learn how to deal with the drawbacks.
A little trial by error.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But I would never, I feel strongly enough about it that I would never start a class with wood pulp paper of beginners. I just wouldn't do it.
Sure.
So, the budget issue can be a big one for some people. One of the things I tell a lot of people is there are 100% cotton grades out there that won't break your wallet.
Okay.
You can get these little packs. I've seen them at Hobby Lobby. They probably sell them elsewhere. They're like 5x7 or 6x9 B paper.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I practice on that all the time. It's a really kind of budget-based 100% cotton paper, and it paints really well. And if you are buying it at Hobby Lobby, you can download the app. You can get 40% off of it any day of the week. So
Okay.
there are ways. Now, I've had a lot of people comment that live in Europe. Availability is a problem, or distributorship has caused the price on 100% papers just to be really, really high.
Right.
But Marty, I had a guy just today send me an email. He's having trouble. He was trying to get some troubleshooting with one of the techniques he was using.
Yeah.
And I told him, first of all, it looked like he was having trouble with his paper. He switched paper. He was using Strathmore 400. He switched to an Arches, and immediately, at least 3/4 of the problems he was having cleared right up.
Sure.
So
Okay.
there's that. But yeah, I mean, there's an old saying in photography, the best camera is the one you have in your hand. And I guess to a certain extent that can be true with watercolor paper. You can practice certain things, and but your success level is just not going to be the same. It just won't.
So you'll just run into sort of frustration. What about for folks who, because I think one of the struggles with sketch artists is they sketch in sketchbooks that are rarely 100% cotton sketchbooks.
Right.
Most sketchbooks are going to be the wood, the cellulose or wood pulp sketchbook paper.
Yeah.
Even really good sketchbooks like Stillman and Byrne and
Sure.
And others.
Well, it usually, and this, we usually just paint around the drawbacks. You usually don't paint multiple layers quick. Right. It's usually a very kind of a fresh, loose, or it's line and wash,
right.
which most of these pulp papers, these wood pulp, cellulose papers, you can color in, with a single layer, do maybe a little bit of shading. Sure. And that's just it. You paint around the drawbacks. But some people, even in sketchbooks, some people feel strongly enough about it. And I'm going to mention, everyone has probably, or most people by now may have heard of Irwin Leon, the guy who produced The Perfect Sketchbook.
Yeah.
He travels a lot, does a lot of plein air and travel logs, cityscapes, that kind of thing, all different kinds. And he felt strongly enough about it that he produced his own sketchbook with Fabriano Artistico paper inside. So what does that tell you?
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess if you're a serious, like, I don't mean to say that sketch artists aren't serious, because I'm a sketch artist. I'm pretty serious about it. I like it. But sure. But what I was getting at was that maybe in some regard, like, maybe the market isn't as demanding in the sketchbook area for that 100% cotton, because people are thinking, like, for the same reason they don't oil paint in a sketchbook. It's not really meant to last 1,000 years. It's just a book. Yeah. I'm keeping some rough sketches. So traditionally, sketchbooks, if you go back in history, were used as they're part of a larger process. They're not the finished work traditionally, but so maybe that's where sketchbook companies could catch up a little bit. And I was talking to
it's a cost issue too.
Right, it's expensive to produce and that, but I was talking to Michael Ginsberg the other day, and apologies that I keep glancing at my phone because I'm trying to get our guests lined up. But Michael Ginsberg had mentioned me the other day that, you know, they might have some news forthcoming on a sketchbook using higher quality paper, which would be very interesting. And Michael Ginsberg works for, well, he's the president of Legion Paper, who produces some of the watercolors papers we're going to talk about today. But we'll get into that in a minute or two. But it was interesting to hear him say that, and I've heard other people that produce sketchbooks, you know, that are close to the industry say the same thing. Well, maybe it's time. So I think the first one to market with that at some kind of an affordable price point is going to be pretty successful. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but apart from the Perfect Sketchbook guy and a few other sort of boutique sketchbook producers, there's not really a mainstream sketchbook producer doing cotton rag sketchbook, right?
Well, Arches produces what they call a field book.
The field book, right?
And it's really expensive. It's like $40, $45. But then again, you know, Irwin Leon's product was $50. So, and I just saw today Winsor Newton's new paper. You know, you and I were talking about that the other day. And Dick Blick now has the new Winsor Newton professional paper in stock. They have a field book, or they're calling it a journal, a little 5x7 journal, which I'm going to order one and see what it's like. That's 100% cotton paper. I think I saw something go by in the comments, and it's true. Kilimanjaro from Cheap Joe's, that's the Cheap Joe's brand. They have a field book similar to Arches. I think it's a spiral bound. Do I have that right? Judy's Art Stuff said that. I think it's a spiral bound like the Arches field book.
Oh, I gotcha.
And Kilimanjaro is a 100% cotton paper. So there are alternatives out there. They're a lot more expensive than, say, you know, a Stillman and Burn or some other, you know, wood pulp based journal.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
But you're right. You know, there's really nothing out there. I saw a guy the other day on eBay, who makes them himself.
Oh, his own
out of Arches. Yeah, he puts them in bindings and stuff. So,
well, do you remember you sent me on a link the other day to a guy? I think it was you, Steve. You sent me to a guy that does. He does these beautiful drawings in a sketchbook, and then he cuts them out and he frames them and sells them. I think I can't remember the guy's name now. Do you remember who you were?
Was that me? I don't recall that.
Might have been you. Yeah. See, it's all running in to each other now. But yeah. So anyway, I was checking him out, and he's just using regular sketchbook pages, and then taking them out, framing them, and then selling his watercolor work that way. So I mean, it's possible for it to be finished work. It's just that I wouldn't expect that paper, you know, even in conservator ship, that paper is not going to. Eventually, it just falls apart. That paper. It's very. It remember handling. If you've ever like been in a place where there's a bunch of old newspapers and stuff, and you pick up an old paper and it kind of crumbles in your hands, that's kind of the extreme of the alpha cellulose. I mean, I suppose if you get 140-pound alpha cellulose paper, it's not going to crumble so easy, but it'll get brittle over time, and it'll discolor and lots of other things. So
yeah, and you know, to go back to one thing you said, if you're sitting in your studio and you've got a pad of Strathmore 400 or Fabriano Studio, and that's all you have, don't shelve your paints just because that's all you have. I definitely am not saying use it. You can learn a lot by painting on any paper. So yeah, I guess I'm not clear in that respect. But you know, work towards 100% cotton paper, and you will eventually see the difference. There's just going to be new things that you can do. That's as simple as that. But
all right, well,
you know, I wanted to ask you because I remember you've got some pretty good knowledge about how these papers are made. I saw a video where you included some of that. Like it's always confusing to me, the mold made, the cylinder,
Yeah.
this machine? Is there anything about that that we ought to know as artists?
Well, there's mold made, machine made, handmade, different kinds of methods to making paper. But if you're talking about the two kinds of paper that we generally think of as watercolor paper, there's machine made and mold made. So a machine made paper is made on a machine called a fourdrinier. And basically, and that fourdrinier looks like a big long machine with a lot of rollers in it and felt pads. And on the top of that thing, there's a vat. And the vat is basically liquid cotton with a bunch of whatever chemicals the paper producer pours in, which makes up their paper recipe. That might include special chemicals to help with sizing and things like that. Then that liquid runs out onto the felt pads and through a series of rollers, and then out comes a machine-made paper. Now, a mold-made paper, as I understand it, Steve, is a little different in that it basically runs on the same type of machine, a fourdrinier, but the fourdrinier runs a lot slower, and it sort of spills out onto the felt pads and rollers, and that's why you get like a deckled edge. That's why you can tell like a mold-made paper from machine-made paper, which will have a very straight cut edge, and you'll see a deckled edge. That is a mold-made paper.
Okay.
Handmade papers are made quite a bit differently, where the liquid is sort of poured out and then manually rolled to a, that's why you'll have inconsistencies in a handmade paper in terms of peaks and valleys, thicknesses, and whatnot. So,
sure.
But this is all, I kind of got an education on this when I did that video, but
yeah,
there's some interesting different ways that papers are made, and some places in France still produce paper in the traditional way it was done, several hundred years ago, either handmade or, this antique machine made or mold made paper where it's just poured.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's what I know.
Yeah, I saw that video, but I think I forgot a lot of the differences, but that's good to know. That's good to know. So, yeah.
So,
well, what about the brands?
Yes, okay, hang on a second now. Let me why don't you start off on the brands, Steve, and I'm going to try to get our guest lined up here.
Okay.
He's having a little trouble with the link. Okay.
Well, first of all, let's just talk about the big brands, the big boys, the
big boys,
the big guys that sling all the weight. So no surprise here, Arches is number one, and I'm talking about in usage. They've been around since 1492.
Yeah.
I've always made jokes about whether Columbus might have had a chart made by made on Arches paper. Who knows?
Right.
But yeah. So Arches, it's funny because I was doing a little survey of this guy right here. Now this is the Splash Annual that comes out every year, and this is the latest one. And I did a little tally, and fully, I would say 80% of all the pictures in here are on Arches paper or Arch.
Okay.
Second to that was Fabriano Artistico, a distant second, I might add, and everything else, all other papers were a distant third. All other papers combined. And that would probably vary from year to year, but that just gives you a little bit of an idea. Arches is a great paper. It's just it's consistent. I've been using it for 40 years.
Okay.
Since I was, in college. And I've used rarely anything else. Since I started this channel, I've started testing a lot of other papers, and there are a number of them that aren't bad. Fabriano Artistico is a great paper. But I just know what I get with Arches is consistent. It's robust. I know exactly what's going to happen when I paint. It's predictable. And I think that you could say that about several papers. I think third and fourth and fifth to those would be, as I said, Fabriano Artistico, Saunders Waterford from the
Made in the UK, right?
Yeah, made in the UK.
Okay.
That's the St. Cuthbert's mill. They also make Milford, which is a 100% cotton, but their top line that most people know is Saunders Waterford. Bockingford is not 100% cotton. It's a cellulose paper. It may have some content. I don't remember. Strathmore 500 is a very fine paper. I think the one thing holding it back is that it's only sold in the high-end art stores. It's kind of hard to find. I mean, I can go in literally just about any craft store, and I may pay through the nose, but I can find arches. About all I'm going to find with Strathmore is their 400, 300, and 200. Finding the 500 around here is a little bit difficult. So, but anyway, it's a fine paper. Canson, Montleroy, very nice paper. I've got all of that. So those are, I would call the big brands, the high end. And what about you? Do you use any of the sheet papers or blocks of high-end paper?
I do use some of the sheet paper. I've been most recently using some of the Hahnemühle, but
yeah,
I do have some Fabriano and Arches. Yeah, because I mean, I guess Arches was the first watercolor paper I ever used, and you know, I liked it. It wasn't too expensive, but then I turned to, like, I wanted to find a less expensive brand or something,
mm-hmm.
and I bought some Canson,
sure.
And I tried that. And then over the years, I've gotten more, you know, as I got more experience, I've tried things like the Fabriano and the, you know, some of the other Italian brands. Is it Fabriano that makes the is it Mangione or Margarione? I forget the name of it, but it's another high-end paper. You know, once Wet Paint gave me a sampler, and the samplers are great. I'll just show it to folks. Basically, the sampler contains, you know, every paper on this list here, including some that are quite strange to people. They go, oh, well, how can a polyethylene be a watercolor paper? You know, when you talk about the UPO or the, you know, synthetic papers.
Yeah.
But they actually work pretty good.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we could talk more about these papers in a minute, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because papers like UPO and what's that, Terra something or other, Terra Skin, polyethylene papers like that, they're treated with a surface something treatment that keeps the water from building up or beating up.
Well, there's a calcium carbonate, it says.
Yeah. Okay.
High density polyethylene. It's the same stuff your soda bottles, you know, they put your soda in. This stuff, high density polyethylene, but they make paper out of it.
Right.
Which is way better than a bottle, right? So I'm sorry for all the noise.
And people who paint on that and like that style are probably going to have a fairly easy time painting on wood pulp paper, because you get that, you know, paint tends to sit on the top.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. And it's a translucent, you know, you can see it you can see the light through it. That polyethylene paper, it's really cool.
Sure.
And I've seen some people do extraordinary paintings on that.
Yeah, and there's no absorbency whatsoever, so it's a very different style of painting.
Right. Yeah, it rolls off. So yeah, well, anyway, those are papers we can talk about in a little bit, but I just wanted to, okay, wait a second. What is this one? This is a Strathmore. This is a Strathmore paper. It says it there. It's got the little, can you see that, Steve?
Yeah.
The little Strathmore logo thing in the corner
yes.
there. Yeah, and this is a real light paper. This isn't even 140 pound. I don't know what this is, like a 90 pound paper?
Yeah, they have a 90 pound. I'm trying to, I think their Strathmore 500 is Aquarius, Gemini, and I forget what else. That may be it. And they're in different weights.
When you use it, when you use that type of paper, what I guess what I was going to ask is like, does the weight of the paper influence your brand, or does the brand influence the weight of the paper you choose? Does that make any sense?
No, no. There are a lot. For instance, 90 pound. That's not used very much by most watercolorists, but it might be used in a mixed media sense. For
Sure.
instance, somebody who is doing for instance, you might be a pen and ink artist, and you get some 90 pound rather than a Bristol board, you would get a 90 pound, maybe a 90 pound hot press, and do your ink work on it. But it would give you a watercolor surface,
Right.
so that you can color. And they use fairly dry, not extremely wet washes. And, you know, that would be how you'd use it. You could stretch it. It still would buckle some.
Okay.
So, no. Now, Arches may make a 90 pound. I don't know. I think they do. I think there was one in that sampler. But,
yeah, there might be. Let's see. Arch is 90 pound. Yep. That might be what that. No, that's a Stonehenge.
Yeah. So weight is really not equivalent to quality.
Okay.
It is the price, but that's just because there's more, you know.
Yeah, but people will often make that mistake. They'll go,
Yes.
well, a heavier watercolors paper is probably going to be a better quality watercolor.
Yeah.
But in fact, it might not be. Yeah. I see.
That's right. Right. And sketchbooks, like Irwin Leon.
Yeah.
When he put his perfect sketchbook together, he used 90 pound
Okay.
Fabriano Artistico. So it's a great paper, but it's a little lighter weight. But that's fine. You know, in a sketchbook, you paint a little drier, and it works beautifully. Works beautifully.
Well, I think there'd be a big trade-off between, you know, cost and weight, as you mentioned before. You know, the heavier the paper, the more it's going to cost you.
Yeah. Yeah.
In general. So, one other thing I wanted to touch on as far as the watercolor stuff. So, Wet Paint gave me this watercolor handbook. I think it's from the 1980s, but it lists on it like all the different kind of watercolors, papers, and their different characteristics and stuff, Steve. And it's pretty good. It's a pretty dang good book, even for its age. You know,
Cool.
It'll tell you all of the properties, and some of these papers don't even exist anymore. They're not even made. But
Yeah.
here's the one I was thinking of, the Magnani. You see that paper there? Yeah.
Huh. Never heard of it.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool paper, and it's still made, and it's still available. You know, I think at Wet Paint. But you know, if you want to talk about Fabriano Artistico or any of the papers, the well-known papers, they're right there. Cool. The other cool thing that was in this book was that Vera, the paper lady over at Wet Paint, had made a lot of notes, and she let me borrow her her notes. So that was cool. Yeah,
Neat.
and I to study up on it a little bit. So I'm having a little trouble bringing Stuart into the chat room, so I'm going to call him on the phone.
Okay.
See if we can bring him in over the phone.
Okay.
So just give me a second or two, Steve. We'll try to get him on board.
All right. You want me to talk about whatever?
Well, yeah. I mean, let's see. So,
well, you know, we ought to talk about finishes.
Sure.
Hot press, cold press, rough. Yeah, I get asked that a lot, and I've never actually made a video about it. But I answer questions about it all the time in the chat. Hot press is smooth, cold press is a slightly textured, and rough is rough. And by far the most common, and I would call multi-purpose, is cold press. Excuse me. You can do pretty much any technique on it. And I think it gives you the most even washes. It's a little thirstier, takes a little longer to dry, and these are general. It varies from brand to brand. You probably, it's probably a little more forgiving. Hot press, though, is great for detail. It's great for someone maybe who doesn't paint quite as wet, although I've seen, really washy paintings with it. The color tends to sit on top a little more with hot press. You can get those crisp edge details with hot press. It dries quicker usually. And I have noticed in different brands that sizing differs a little bit, and that probably accounts for drying time. And like in some brands, hot press will lift a little easier. So granulation, I think, shows up a little more dramatically on hot press, and that's because granulation is a settling out of heavy particulates. And so on cold press, because you have all those texture pockets, it tends to distribute more evenly. Although you can see granulation in cold press too, but on hot press, it tends to swirl and pool in areas, and so you get a little more dramatic effect on hot press with granulation. If you don't like granulation, then you won't like that. If you love granulation, then try it on hot press sometime and see what happens. How's that coming?
What's that?
I was just asking about Stuart.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's just having trouble getting into the.
Okay.
He's been invited to Google Hangouts, but he can't get in. So I'm going to give him a call.
Okay.
So let's do this. As long as I don't show his home number, I guess. People don't call me. Call him.
Well, Marty, hello.
Hi, Stuart. How are you?
Good.
Good. Well, we're on live, and the world is watching you, Stuart. Unfortunately,
where are they watching me from?
Yeah, unfortunately, they can't see you. So when you clicked on the link, what did you see? Just yourself?
I'm just looking at myself.
Ah, sure. Okay, well, something's not working right. So now I've got you by phone, and I wonder, can people hear Stuart? Stuart, can you say hello?
Hello.
All right, let me check the chat room just to get an acknowledgement that you can be heard. Let's see. Val, any luck? Can you hear Stuart okay?
Hello.
All right, I think people
can hear him.
you.
I can hear him.
All right, good. So this is joining us right now is the artist Stuart Lockridge. And Stuart, as I featured Stuart on my channel before, Steve, I've sent you and talked about Stuart's work many times in the past.
Yes.
Stuart is a very fine artist. He's a fine artist, I should say, and he does the whole process from beginning to end, from sketching to watercolors to oil paintings to copper plate etchings. And some
wow.
I own some of Stuart's spectacular etchings. And if you glance behind me here, you can't see it. I'm going to slide over here a little bit. I've got a collection, and I'm very proud of it, of Stuart's work. And it's too bad Stuart can't see this right now, but in these cases are some of the collected works of Stuart that I have collected over the years. And he is just a spectacular artist. And like I said, one of the best watercolorists I know, apart from, Steve Mitchell, who's also excellent. But what I wanted to ask you, Stuart, tonight, and maybe we can take some questions for you as well, is what sorts of papers do you use, Stuart? Because I know you can be somewhat unconventional when it comes to paper. You'll grab anything handy.
I will grab anything handy. I generally like stuff with tones on it, darker tones. So often I'm grabbing printmaking paper, which might not have a size on it. So painting on it can be real finicky. But I like the challenges of that. So my favorite paper for years has been the Anagoni paper. The Anagoni paper that's good for water media. Has an an tone to it.
We didn't mention that one, did we, Steve? The Anagoni paper,
no.
Yeah, which is actually a good paper. Good point, Stuart. So in the meantime, while Stuart's talking, I encourage you to, I'm going to post a link to his website in the chat room. Go over, take a look while Stuart's telling us about this stuff, and take a look at his work, and you'll see what an extraordinary artist he is. But so, Stuart, can you talk a little bit about when you choose, like, when you're going to go into the field, what kind of paper are you going to take? Is there a difference between when you're going to do a serious watercolor painting for sale, or when you're just going out to do like a sketch as a part of your oil painting process?
The papers I would use for studio sketches and field sketches are the same. They overlap. They repeat. So if I'm doing a larger watercolor finished in the studio, I would probably use the same paper that I used out in the field to make sure I have a direct translation.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about why you'd make that choice? Why? Why?
Well,
yeah, exactly.
Because I'm often working on tone paper, so the brights I don't rely on the white paper for the brights. I hit my brights with an opaque white.
Okay.
And because of that, I want to have the same undertone going on below the painting in the studio painting as I do in the field sketch.
Okay. Makes sense.
Or if I am working on a white paper in the field, and I felt like I had to overwork the pigment to get it dark enough, then I might go to a tone paper so I can work the pigment lighter.
Gotcha. Is that a function of the types of paint you're using, or what you want to see at the end of a finished process? Or does it make a difference whether you're going to take the painting to an etching or an oil painting?
No, I generally don't know that stuff at first. I have to think on it for months or sometimes years to figure out what piece is going to travel to what medium. So, I just generally pick a tone paper based on the scene I'm looking at. That's where it all starts. So if I'm looking at a scene where I can maximize a blue toned paper or a gray toned paper with the most color showing, then I'll pick that. Or if I'm working in a brown tone paper, then I would pick a brown tone paper if the overall scene had brown tones in it that could come out. So I'm kind of assigning the tone of the paper to the scene I see.
Gotcha. Well, a question for you, and then Steve, maybe you have a question or two for Stuart. But you Stuart, you grew up with quite a fine printmaker in your father, Leon Lockridge, who works in Colorado. He's quite an extraordinary painter and a printmaker. And when you grow up in that environment, and you talked about papers, or when's like your first memory of a discussion about paper and what types of paper you should use for what, and what was that like?
Well, growing up under a great printmaker was excellent. I learned a lot. I didn't have the wherewithal at the time to be discussing papers. I was too busy being a high school kid.
Sure.
So, paper, we have paper discussions now. So I guess I'm making up for it. And those discussions are often on the tonal ranges of paper and how raggy the paper is, how soft it is. Does it have a size on it? Can the size be applied if there is not a size on it? Because we are often picking out papers that aren't intended for watercolor use. And so then the question becomes, how can we proceed working on them?
Sure. Well, Steve, what did you have, Stuart? Any questions?
I did see on your
Hang on
site.
1 second. Hang on, Steve. You think you're muted here.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry. I'll relay your questions to him.
I did see on Stuart's site that he does do some watercolors, and they appear to be on white paper. So I was just curious, when he's using a wet media, very wet and watercolory, what does he like to use? So
the question here is from Steve. He's asking you, Stuart, like he does see you paint on white paper from time to time, wet media, and he's wondering, when you do paint on white, what types of paper would you choose? And you know, I guess that's the question, right, Steve?
Yeah.
Yep.
For white paper, I generally choose an Arches, medium pound, the rough texture. That would be cold press, right? The rough texture.
Yeah.
Generally that. If I'm doing portrait work, I often like to work on a hot press on the Burton Silverman techniques, where you can have more erasing and pooling.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the questions was like from the audience, and I'm sure Val will remind these people to put their quotes and their questions in quotes or what have. But one of the questions is, where can we find these tone papers, Stuart?
At a good art store in the printmaking section, often.
Okay.
Good
so,
tip.
In St. Paul, of course, we have wet paint, and they have a great paper department, and I will go through and pick out 10, you know, generally I'll go out and buy 10 sheets at a time. I might buy 5 that I don't know and have no experience on, and then keep accumulating others that I do have experience on. I rip them into small piles about maybe 9 by 7 inches, and I carry a substantial notebook with me that has all these different types of paper in there. They're labeled on the lower corner, so that when I pull that paper out on the field, if I'm looking at a sunset and I want to really capture that quick before the light effect goes, and I can grab a tone paper that accordingly matches those colors, I can hit my white right away with the sun on the opaque white, and then travel out onto some color notes real quick. So it's really about immediacy when you're working on those tones. But you know, where you would go, I don't know where you would go online. I don't shop online, so I always shop at the art store in St. Paul.
Well, one time Stuart and I bumped into each other at this place called the Frameworks. It's a gallery. I think they sell some of Stuart's work there, and we have some good friends that run the gallery. And I bumped into Stuart, and he had this. He had like this stack of what is it? What are they called, Stuart? When you punch out the matting and you're left with that little square, the leftover square in the middle.
The leftover window.
Yeah, the leftover. Yeah, that's right. You had a stack of those, and I thought, hey, Stuart, what are you going to do with that stack? And you go, well, what I'm gonna paint on them. You remember?
Yeah, that's a great point, because you can begin experimenting on tone stuff just from all the matte scraps at a frame shop. That's a great point. And
they're cheap, right? I mean, you got a whole stack for like $10, Steve. Yeah, and so I saw Stuart with this stack, and I'm like, dude, because I always want to know what Stuart's up to, because you know he's one of my favorite artists in the world. But
and they're real versatile. So you can do a little watercolor sketch and then go back in with pencil and really work them and erase them too without them furring up.
Right, which is one of the things Steve and I did not we haven't mentioned yet on the broadcast. Steve, I'm going to try to help me out here on Google. Unplug you from the my mic, and how do I unmute you somehow so I can hear you on my? Can you say something, Steve?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Steve now too.
Oh, perfect. Good.
Oh.
We were successful. So now
Good.
Steve and Stuart can talk to each other, and my universe is complete. So,
and now we've got nothing to say.
That's right. These are my two of my favorite artists in the whole world. So when we talk about process, you know, we're talking about watercolor paper in particular here, Stuart. But as you go through the whole process of your practice, you will do a charcoal drawing, a pencil graphite drawing, you'll do a watercolor, and then when you get to doing your engravings, can you just talk a little bit about the very special paper? And this is a little deviation, Steve. Don't hate me, brother.
No.
Does such a fantastic job with his engravings. What paper do you use there, Stuart? Is there a big difference?
There's not a whole lot of difference in my opinion. It's more about how you ink and what kind of ink you use. But I generally don't print onto tone papers with etchings. I generally print onto a white or off-white cream. And I'll often go Reves or just your standard classic brands of printmaking paper that are tried and true. A pretty good pound. I don't want it too flimsy with frame in 2 years to come.
Can you mention a brand, Stuart? What are those tried and true printing papers?
Yeah, Somerset, Reves, R-I-V-E-S.
Okay.
Those would be some of the top ones. There's innumerable brands, and I'm always trying new ones. But those, you know, if you're starting out with a good pound Reves paper on printmaking, that's excellent. And then you can use your leftover scraps to do watercolors on.
Okay, perfect. So, Steve, you got any questions for Stuart? I feel like you two should probably shake hands someday. But
yeah, I was curious about. I saw, and I thought about trying this myself. Artist who tones his own paper with acrylic. I don't know if Stuart's tried that. And
why acrylic versus watercolor?
Well, just but I think the reason is because of the permanence. It might have been an acrylic ink.
It wouldn't lift.
Pardon me?
So the acrylic wouldn't lift.
Right, exactly. I mean, I presume I didn't do it, but that's what I saw. I think this was a gouache painter, and they would toning, and maybe it was. I also saw, James Gurney do this, and he uses gouache and casing to paint. He does a lot of on location painting with gouache and casing, but I believe he toned his paper with acrylic ahead of time. Yeah, so it wouldn't lift. I didn't know if you tried it or if that.
I'm trying that out. I do a lot of toning with watercolor, and I haven't had much of a problem with lifting. And in fact, it's always nice to know that in my cases, I can go lift if I really want to.
Okay.
And I can pull out a little light if I need it. Of course, you won't ever go back to bright. On the toning,
good point.
It brings back an interesting point to. I was looking at some of Turner's old sketchbooks that are, I think, in the Victoria Albert Museum, and his sketchbooks have the first tone was a phthalo blue wash, really strong, and then the second tone over that was a burnt umber. With like a little white in it, just to opaque it a touch, and then he would put that over the blue, over the phthalo blue, and then he would do his paintings, his watercolor sketches on top of that, of course using an opaque white for highlights.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And it added a beautiful, like, muddy tone that you couldn't get with just the brown, or of course you were going to get way too blue with just phthalo, but
yeah.
There's a lot of interesting layerings you can do with the toning. It's fun.
Yes, yes.
That's weird because that's like a warm and a cool, right? I mean,
yeah, it is a warm and a cool, and it breaks, and there's these layers to the surface when you're looking at his little sketches where you're seeing the brown layer, and then you're seeing a blue layer underneath that.
Ah, okay.
And it just almost gets you falling into the piece.
Ah, sure. And is he lifting at that point, or I mean, what's going on with the? I guess that's a technical topic, but
no, I don't think he would be lifting so much. For all his highlights, he was using a strong opaque white.
Okay, okay.
And Steve Mitchell, what are you often painting on?
Well, I primarily just paint on watercolor paper, white watercolor paper. Although I'm trying this year to incorporate a little more gouache, probably more in plein air. So I have been pulling out some of the tone sketchbooks that you can buy over the counter. You know, like the Strathmore Tone Tan, Tone Gray, and the Stillman Burn. But they do have a Strathmore just came out with a multimedia tone tan, which I've been playing around with. So that's really all I'm doing in tone. Most of my watercolor painting is It's just white watercolor paper. Arches,
Right.
Fabriano. Been using Stonehenge a lot lately.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, well, Stuart, I was just going to ask when you, so I mean, I guess Steve, you know, I mean, I'm more of a sketchbook artist. You know, I like to go and sketch in a book. And as Steve and I were talking about yesterday or today earlier, it's mostly pulp, cellulose, wood pulp paper in a sketchbook. There's not, unless you buy a field book, there's usually not a cotton sketchbook. But I've noticed what you do, Stuart, is you put together your own sketchbooks. And is that because you want to use the 100% cotton paper, or is there any other particular reason for that?
It's a way to use leftover print paper. As a printmaker, you come across piles and piles of papers that you wonder what to do with.
Sure.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So with a little binding know-how, you can plop those into different sketchbooks of different sizes, and then you can tone them if you want. But it's a great way to just learn how to work on a certain paper when you have a stack of 20 in there, and it's not designated watercolor paper, but something else.
Sure.
And I found over time some interesting techniques can be found out on these untraditional papers.
Nice.
Yeah, it makes
Nice.
sense. Well, Stuart, any other tips, tricks, mysteries, magical spells you can share with us for working with watercolor paper or papers in general?
Yeah, well, you know, I just love the idea of sketching on a medium tone paper and using very little highlight white, but trying to do as much as possible with color, and then not pushing the color too far, but then departing from the color and going back into the drawing. So that's where I have a lot of fun, is I put a color layer down, and then I come back in with the pencils, working up to, say, a 9B if I want, and accenting and drawing, and that brings me back to my etchings. So how the mediums feed each other.
Yeah, so there's some questions for you from the audience, Stuart. So I'm going to try. Hopefully I didn't miss too many. Question, what happens when you mix watercolor with acrylic?
The acrylic will probably dominate and create a pasty, opaque look. I would say to not do that.
Okay, here's another question. What is a good lightning for painting? Lighting, is it lighting? Okay.
Whiting, you would probably, I would highly and strongly recommend Dr. Martin's white. And you only need Dr. Martin's white in your watercolor kit. Generally, if you're working transparent watercolor on toned paper, the only opaque bodied you'll need is Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed-proof white.
Okay, I might have gotten the question wrong, but the person can re-ask if that's not right. So here's another one from a viewer. Does watercolor paper work for gouache, or is there a specific paper for that?
I would say they all work for each other. You can work any medium on a good watercolor paper.
Yeah, it works fine.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
All right. From Rom Arts, here's a question. Can matte paper take watercolor and printmaking? Is matte paper 100% cotton? Is this matte suitable for final artwork for sale? Can matte paper take a watercolor ground on it? That's a lot of questions, but
I would say we need to clarify what matte paper is. Steve, do you know what matte paper is?
I think they're talking about matte board.
When you cut out the centers of the matte framer, you know,
it's not cotton, but you can get acid free.
Yeah, they have fully archival rag. So if you get 100% rag matte board, you are dealing with a absolutely archival, stable substrate.
Okay.
And most places sell acid-free matte board.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say most places sell acid-free matte board too, which is not rag, but it is considered archival.
and I would say it would be a stable substrate for hundreds of years. But I wouldn't recommend printing on those, because the drawback about the mat board is that it's 4-ply or 8-ply, and there's no transparency to it. So if you're doing a transfer of a drawing through a light box, there's no way you can get the light coming through that, and it's not flexible. So it won't take any printmaking medium intaglio process.
Okay, fair enough. There's another question. Oh, the question was about lighting. So what kind of light bulb is best for painting? What do you use, Stuart? What do you use, Steve?
Go ahead.
5,000 K is what I use, or above that, and they're very easy to find now. That's just natural daylight. You get down around the tungsten, well, everything is LED or CFL now, but if you get down around the warm white in the 2800 K range, then it's really, really warm and yellow. But everything in my studio is right around 5,000 K, and all you have to do, that you'll find that designation on any light bulb. It's really don't have to buy the expensive like OT lights or any of that stuff anymore, because daylight bulbs are really plentiful and easy to find on fluorescent tubes, on LEDs, on CFLs, you name it. You look for it, you can find it.
Good. So one or two more questions for Stuart while he's still with us. How about how can we make white black paint popular again? This is from Ian Jackson.
White black paint?
Yeah,
I'm not sure what that means.
You might want to clarify that question, Ian. I'm not sure I get that one. So those are the questions we have so far, Stuart. And listen, I know you're a busy guy, and I really appreciate you.
I got time. No rush.
You got time? Okay, good.
Sure.
All right, well, so stay with us a little longer then. So Steve and I were going to talk a little bit about the properties of paper and stuff. We kind of went over some of the brands we like. Hey, can we touch on something that's not a very popular topic, which is like that a lot of people won't talk about, and that's like what kind of papers won't you use or don't you like? I mean, I think it's fair to talk a little bit about those papers. Maybe Steve, you can kick us off, and if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, that's a discovery process for me that's ongoing. It's funny. I used to have, I still have a pad of Strathmore 400. I have Strathmore 400 journals, hardbound journals, spiral bound journals. I did a little playing around with it. The more I paint on that stuff, the more I hate it. I just do not like it. That's one of those wood pulp papers I just don't think it's very good. It's just me. I know some people like it okay and think it's great, and I think a lot of it has to do with style of the cotton papers. And I haven't tried all the cotton papers out there, but of the 100% cotton watercolor papers, I see a lot of places starting to carry fluid, and I just didn't hit it off. I think it stains really, really badly, which means if you go into it painting wet and wet, you might have more success. But if you're putting down washes and then spraying them, or then trying to soften the edges, it's very, very frustrating. I did not like fluid. There's something different about the sizing. And in general, for studio work, not for sketchbooks, but for studio work, I don't use anything but 100% cotton paper. And I've been using and loving Arches for years. I've been using Fabriano Artistico. Love that. I love the Stonehenge Aqua. We're going to talk about these new guys in a minute. Canson Heritage, Hanamula, Saunders Waterford, Strathmore 500, Canson Montdewar. I love all those, but I don't usually do finished studio work on anything but something like that.
Okay. What about you, Stuart? Do you have a particular brand you're not very fond of, or maybe don't like or avoid?
You know, one brand that I haven't connected with would be the. I'm looking at it here right now. It's a Hanemuhle Fine Arts. Hanemuhle.
Yes, know it well. Yep.
And the Cezanne brand, I'm not too sure about that. It didn't seem. I have it sitting aside here in my do not use pile. There's like a Turner watercolor paper that I wasn't sold on. I don't know if they were trying to recreate the Turner paper, but it just didn't. Nothing flowed. The waters just didn't spread. It was way too absorbent. And I think generally student grade papers I just stay away from.
Sure.
And nothing, certainly nothing as light as 90 pounds. I generally like to go up to the, 120 pounds or something like that. Something with some strength to it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you should mention those papers, you guys, because I actually like fluid paper, and I actually really like the Hanemuhle paper. I'll tell you why. The reason, this is a Hanemuhle 300 paper, and I'm going to show it to folks watching the video, and I did some swatches on it, and I really like the way the paint flows on this paper, this Hanemuhle 300-pound paper, and I also enjoyed their 140-pound paper as well. Here is some a little bit of gouache I did on that paper, which I liked as well. And for fluid, I swatched out some colors on fluid as well and had good luck with it. I thought it was pretty good. Now, that might tell you something about why Stuart and Steve are more advanced watercolorists than I am.
No.
I guess,
have you ever tried the Holbein Cluster watercolor paper that comes in those little handsome bound dark forest green books?
I have, Stuart, I saw you using one at sketch class, at figure sketching class one night. I think you were using one, or you had one in your possession.
Yeah, I think that's what it's been designated for now, is just quick figure sketches, because it doesn't seem to have a good holding power when you start layering your colors on it.
Well, I was going to mention that because it's not one of my favorite papers. The Japanese make great and fantastic papers. They just tend to be thin for my liking. So I like the feel of a little bit of a heavier paper. Now, we do, as a matter of fact, have a Hanemuhle representative, Carol Boss, in the chat room tonight. So she may be able to answer some questions about Hanemuhle. But my experience with that paper has been pretty fantastic. But
mine as well.
We're going to get into a little bit about the new papers. And Stuart, you such a, I'll tell you guys what, I love going to Stuart's studio because A, there's always fantastic work going on there, but B, I'm actually stepping back in time when I go there, because to a time when an artist used to execute a process from sort of the very beginnings and foundational steps in a process all the way up to the master work end of it. Now, Stuart has a frame workshop. He does his own framing, creates his own frames, restores frames so he can frame his own work. He's a hands-on guy, and I like that he likes the tactile nature of his work and to be able to see him execute that process. But one of the things I noticed when I'm in Stuart's studio is that everything has a place and every place has a purpose. So if you look around, things are where they should be for him, for the way he executes his work and his process. But so that said, I kind of lost track of what I was. Okay, we're going to talk about some of the other brands. Stuart, I was going to say, you may be surprised at some of the newer brands and what they've done to make watercolors, to make improvements to traditional watercolors that might make them exceptional in terms of value. Like Hanemuhle's new to the United States, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But go ahead, Steve. I think I'll let you lead off with this topic.
All right. We're calling these new kids on the block, and really 2017 And late 2016 was a great year for watercolor paper. You know, we're in an industry where you don't see a lot of innovation. You don't see a lot of new stuff come along, not like, you know, the crafting community does. But the first thing, and this was about a year ago, was Canson Heritage. You know, Canson tends to be kind of all over the place with their papers. They have Mont du Roy. They had 100% cotton paper called Canson 100. I don't know whatever happened to that. Maybe it's still around. They were marketing and distributing Arches for a while. They didn't make it, but it's been kind of confusing. So I didn't know what Canson Heritage was when it came out, but I bought some and tried it, and it was a new sort of their flagship line, and it's a really nice paper. It's really kind of heavy on the sizing, so it lifts really easily.
You know if it's
that was a good one.
And externally sized or just internally?
I don't know. I think it's in and out both.
Okay,
so,
sure.
But it just seems to have more than say Arches. The other was Stonehenge Aqua. You know, they made quite a ripple in the pond, and yes, rightfully so. You know, I always say about these new papers that the jury is still out, and that's because, you know, to be fair, they have to stand the test of time. You know, they have to be widely accepted, be able to produce them over a long period of time, and just maintain that consistency, which, you know, obviously Arches has a big head start in that realm. So, well, so does Fabriano for that matter. So with that proviso, Stonehenge Aqua excited me probably more than any of the new papers that came along over the last year. I was really excited about it. And mainly, it's not because it did anything great or new, but like Arches, it did what I expected it to do. You know, it got out of my way and let me paint the way I wanted to paint. Yeah. Now, I have noticed a few differences. I don't think it's quite as robust as Arches, but it is, I think, a very fine paper. You know, and sold here in the States, it's a, compared to a lot of top brands, it's value priced, it's reasonable. So Stonehenge Aqua was a good one, you know.
Yeah. Well, I just weigh in before we get Stuart's opinion maybe on some of these newer papers, but for Stonehenge Aqua, Steve, we want to talk about robustness. I ran this particular paper before I painted on it through a washer and dryer twice, underneath a 2-ton truck. I put it underneath a forklift. I soaked it in freezing water, then put it in the refrigerator, then baked it in the oven
at 350
degrees. Yep.
I remember.
And basically, I let it, I tried to dry it out in the wind at 45 miles an hour attached to my car while I was on my way to the car wash, then took the power pressure wash to the paper to wash it off because I'd run over it a couple times. Then I painted a painting on it, and it held up really good. Yeah. I love the Stonehenge Aqua. Here's another painting I did on a 300 pound paper.
Yeah.
And then if you're just talking about the 100% cotton 140 pound paper, there's just a sampling of some of the, and you can see the deckled edge there. So this is a mold made paper. You know, so we talked a little bit about mold made papers versus machine made earlier, but I had a great time testing this paper and found it to be quite spectacular.
Yeah, that in that regard it is. I think when you go to correct and scrub, and I do a lot of lifting and scrubbing, it's robust, but it pills a little differently than Arches. So I guess to be accurate, it is very resilient, but it acts a little different when you Arches when you scrub and correct.
When you scrub and correct, sure.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Stuart, on some of the newer papers like the Canson Heritage or the Stonehenge Aqua? Have you been able to try any of those out?
No, I haven't. Okay. I have no idea about them.
Yeah, and they're not, I don't think they're toned, so you're going to get a straight white paper, and then you're going to have to tone it. Now, Stuart, I I don't know if you'd ever condone this. You probably wouldn't, and Steve definitely is going to slap me twice when I say this, but I sometimes pour coffee, black coffee, on my 100% cotton paper and tone it that way and then paint over that. It's kind of a fun way to do stuff, you know, and I'm a sketch artist, so, you know, I got to experiment.
Sure.
But, I'll tone my paper that way.
Excellent. Why not? I mean,
yeah, why not?
Morning activity.
Well, it all came about by accident. One day, Larry was sitting next to me and he spilled his coffee, and lo and behold, I had a coffee stain on the sketchbook and just painted over it. It looked cool.
Yeah. You know, let's see what happens.
Yeah, you could try any kind of coffee, you know, whatever you pour into your Keurig or whatever you use. But so, any thoughts on newer types of paper, new technology around papers, Stuart?
You know, I couldn't tell you much about it. I don't know if any of the papers that I use are new by any means. I don't know if the Cartiera Magnani Anagoni paper is new or old. I like the Saint Armand Canal papers.
Yeah.
I don't know if those are new to the market or not. And I haven't paid much attention to what's fresh.
So the second one you mentioned, Stuart, that I think don't they make a line of handmade papers in a mill in France?
The Saint Armand, the Canal papers are made in Montreal.
Oh, Canada.
And,
okay.
It's fibers from leftover clothing.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well, that's cool. So one of the things I'll say in Stuart's defense is Stuart spends an awful lot of time looking back in time at how masters did their work and how things were done in the olden days. So I'm not sure that modern technology.
Why not?
Right. And his printmaking, you know, speaks to that. So
yeah.
But yeah, so I didn't mean to pigeonhole you there, Stuart, but
no, that's fine. The Derriere guard.
Yeah, that's right. Fair enough. So apart from that, what are some other people in the chat room? What experiences did they have with newer papers? It'd be interesting to hear from them. We might have a couple of questions here.
Well, we should mention Hanamula too. That's a new. It's not new, but it's new in the U.S.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, it's an old brand. It's a very old brand. It's a German brand and quite good. I don't know really how to categorize it yet because I haven't spent a lot of time with it. But I will say I haven't had any negative experiences with it yet. Really loved the Leonardo, which was the 300-pound. So and you know, it's a nice paper. So that's a new kid on the block as well in the U.S.
I'm going to give it a new try.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth it, Stuart. You know, I mean, well, what I did was so they've been making paper at this mill in Germany for almost half a millennia. So when you think about, you know, almost 500 years these people have been making paper. Now, obviously, technologies have changed, but they make a really pretty high quality product, in my opinion. And I do enjoy using them for my sketching. You know, again, you know, is not nearly as accomplished as you guys in terms of watercolor, but when I use it, I can use an ink wash on it. I can use, and there are grades of that paper I prefer. So,
Marty, I was impressed with their sketchbook as sketchbooks go. It wasn't cotton, but still, it seemed to do better than, you know, a lot of the sketchbooks I've used. I'm anxious to do some more in that to just see, you know, if that holds true. But
the Hanamula sketchbook.
Yes, you and Stuart talk about that for a second. I'm going to grab mine. 1 second.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Steve, have you tried the from the Vintage Paper Company? This handmade paper, the Wookie Hole Paper Mill.
I haven't.
Okay.
No.
It's heritage paper, so it's already 60 years old.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know how they've held on to it this long without selling it.
So they're just selling like antique aged paper?
They're sourcing and reselling heritage British papers for fine art, bookbinding, and paper conservation. Vintage Paper Company. Okay. And I think the amounts, of course, are limited.
It's just from a variety of different papers? Or?
I couldn't tell you. I only have 2 packs in front of me of, and they're pretty light, 72 pounds and 90 pounds, but they just have a beautiful texture to them, and I haven't painted on them yet.
So I got no, go ahead, Stuart.
And then another paper I've really loved that I don't know if you can even get anymore, but I urge people to try, is from the mint factories here in the States, is when they decompose or kind of recompose the currency, the greenback, into just a paper, and then they sell this paper. And
wow,
buy it.
That's rag.
They're still selling it, but my father acquired some reams of it and made it into sketchbooks, and it has this soft gray-green tone that's just
nice,
and it has a real almost polished surface, but just takes the color really well.
Cool.
Nice, and that would be rag paper too.
Yes, it would.
Hey, Stuart, we should mention your dad's website too. You can just Google Leon Lockridge and find his website, but he's an extraordinary painter and printmaker all in his own right. And you can kind of see where some of Stuart's talent came from. But obviously, we're talking about Hahnemuhle sketchbook here. Now, this is it's called what they say about this is it's a natural white watercolor paper featuring a fine grained structure. It's acid free and has high longevity. Now, people, when we talk about cellulose and wood pulp paper, sure, you're not going to hang that paper in a gallery. It may not last forever, but in a sketchbook, there are sketchbooks that are literally 200 years old right now that are still in decent shape. So it's not like, of course, that might have been different material back there. It might even have been cotton, Steve, but to be truthful. But there are some sketchbooks that can survive a long time because the drawings are enclosed in a nice bound, hardcover like this particular.
Most of them are acid free and archival.
And they're of value. They're generally under very dim light, like some sketchbooks of Turner's or other watercolor artists.
Okay,
what were you going to say, Steve? You had something.
Just that most of the sketchbooks today are acid free and archival anyway, even if they're wood pulp. So it's really not something you'd have to worry about, even if you did want to take it out and frame it.
Now, if you look closely at this paper, and I don't know that folks can see it or not, it's a little like cardstock, like a medium cardstock or whatever. But if you look at real closely, and it's hard to see, but there's a nice texture to this. It's not going to be like a hot press. It's not absolutely smooth like a Bristol or anything, but it's got just enough tooth on it to make it really fun to use. And I've filled 2 of these sketchbooks, the smaller ones of this, and I'm really looking forward to using this larger this field sketchbook. So they're really good. Thanks for bringing it up.
Pick up those sketchbooks.
Well, I get that wet paint, and
excellent.
And we should mention, thanks, Stuart, for bringing that up. I don't want to forget this, Steve, because our good friends over at Wet Paint, for the people watching this video right now, and this weekend only, if you go to Wet Paint and you mention Marty and Steve, right, they will send you out a Stonehenge Aqua in whatever hot or cold press you want at 40% off list. So they're like $23 normally. You're going to send it to you for $15. And Steve, if you mention Marty and Steve, and you can mention Stuart too. If you mention Marty and Steve, they're going to throw in a sample pack of the opposite type of paper you get. So say you get a cold press, they're going to send you a sample pack of the hot press too for free. Just mention Steve and Marty. And so that I think is really this weekend only. So if you're watching this video like 6 years from now or whatever, the sale's over. But if you're watching it tonight live and you go this weekend, that means you have all day tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday to order this, and they'll honor that deal. Steve and Marty, mention our name. It's going to be a 9x12 block, and it's going to come with what, 15 sheets, Steve?
Yeah, I think so.
15
Yeah.
sheets, and
Yeah.
that's a special from Stonehenge Aqua. I don't know if Carol's still around, but I would ask her to get a hold of Wet Paint and match their deal with Hahnemühle. See, Carol, I'm sorry, I can't help myself. Got to give these subscribers good deals.
Yeah, Hahnemühle is out there still kind of working hard to get these different art stores to carry them, and that's the task
because they're
ahead of
new.
them.
They've been around for
availability, and they were making some inroads into that, I think, but
Yes.
you know, they still have a ways to go. It's hard to it's kind of hard to find, but yeah.
So somebody's asking questions about the Hahnemühle paper in there, so maybe Carol can answer their questions. But if you've got questions for Stuart, Steve, or myself about watercolor painting, sketching, sketchbooks, paper, now's the time to ask before we wrap up the program here in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to say a special thank you to Wet Paint and the folks over there for always being so good to our subscribers. Steve, you and I, we have a good relationship with the folks at Wet Paint, and coming this year, you know, I want to break some news here. I'll be putting together a new sketch kit with Wet Paint that will sell in maybe the spring, and I think Steve, can't say for sure, but Steve is going to work hopefully with Wet Paint to put together a maybe a Schminke palette with his favorite colors. We'll see how that goes. Scott from Wet Paint is actually in the chat room, and he corrected me. It's 30% off, so that's still a fantastic deal.
Absolutely.
So you're going from $23.88, I think, normally to $15.95.
Yeah.
And Scott will throw in a sample, some sample papers.
Nice.
So we're getting some questions here. What is a good sketching pencil brand? Okay. I think that one's for me. So I'll Wet Paint's in the house, so I'm glad to see them. But sketching pencil. Well, I use a Faber-Castell TK9400 lead holder with an HB lead in it. But anything with either a German pencil or a Swiss pencil, Caran d'Ache is a great brand. Faber-Castell is a great brand. If you want to save a few dollars, and you want to have a really good brand pencil, Koh-i-Noor makes some nice pencils. Also, you know what? I know they get knocked around a little bit, but Generals, which is kind of an older brand of pencil here in the United States, or Dixon, the Ticonderoga, or a Blackwing pencil, those are all great pencils to use. I like to say, hey, you could create the universe with a humble #2 pencil. It just it's a instrument of mass creation, right, Stuart?
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of the big #2.7 millimeter lead.
Okay. What kind? Tell me where you get that. You just pick that up at Wet Paint?
Target, I think, for $3 you can get a bag of 15 of them.
Okay. Okay, cool. What do you use, Steve, for like your sketching?
Oh, a variety of stuff. I use Koh-i-Noor. I got one of those Faber-Castells you turned me on to, but mainly a lead holder. I've been using mechanical pencils a lot. I like this Uni-Kiritoga roulette, which rotates the lead. I like that a lot. I'm not picky really about the pencils. I grab anything, but I tend to gravitate towards lead holders and mechanical pencils, that sort of thing.
Any reason, any particular reason, Steve?
Just never have to sharpen, for one. I just keep drawing and drawing and drawing. I may switch. I usually do a 0.05 or even a 0.03 if I'm trying to get some meticulous detail. If I'm doing some rough expressive sketching, I'll use the lead holders, but those you do have to sharpen. But it's not like a wood pencil. You don't have to sharpen them as often, and I think they're a little easier to take into the field. So
sure,
it's just something I've gotten used to doing rather than using wood pencils. Yeah,
just because I'm a pencil lover and have just tons of pencils, I have to put a plug in for just the, just a normal #2 pencil. I think you can do a lot of great work with a number to an H or a B. It doesn't matter, an HB.
Whatever you got.
Whatever you got handy. Those are great pencils.
Whatever you got.
Never, ever, ever, please, people, be kind to pencils and don't ever use a machine sharpener. That's just eats pencils. And, you know, you might as well just go down and chop down a tree at random on a city street. Do not feed your pencils to the evil pencil sharpener, machine sharpener. But
decrease carbon footprint.
That's right. That's right. But or if you really want to look at a great variety of pencils, head over to Wet Paint, because they have if they don't carry it, it probably isn't manufactured. So they carry just about everything. So here's another question. I inherited a stack of watercolor paper. Large papers. It says Winsor & Newton on paper. Winsor & Newton website has 3 types: cold press, hot press, and rough. What do I have? Would rough wreck my brushes?
No. Oh, rough won't wreck your brushes. I mean, that's a very common type of watercolor paper. So it just gives you more texture in your paint. It'll be fine on your brushes. I don't know what you have. If it's a sheet, it's probably a good cotton paper, because they don't usually make, I think, the non-cotton papers in sheets. I could be wrong, but I don't think they do. So I don't know if it's in a pad or a block, that may be different. But I don't know what you have. If it's got just a little bit of texture, it's probably cold press. Rough is not used as often, and it's not as common. Cold press is the most common. So I hope that answers your question.
Any thoughts on that, Stuart?
No. Good answer.
Stuart, has Stuart ever wet painted pastels on matte paper for mixed media with ink, pastels, and acrylic?
I have mixed ink and acrylic a little bit, but I've not ever used pastels as a mixed media. So I couldn't offer any feedback really about that if their question is more specific.
Okay. Rock and Raven asks a question here. As a new painter who has only used cheap paper so far, how much do you need to wet arches before before painting wet into wet? Some thoughts on that?
That's a little bit kind of, that can vary. Usually you do have to go over it twice. It usually takes what I call a priming wetting. If you're really going to do wet and wet and you want to keep it wet for a lot of wet and wet painting, you usually have to go prime it. Then I'll usually go over it one more time with a second coat of water, and you just let it absorb in there. But you kind of get a feel for that. You don't want it to be puddly, where you have big, unless you're going for something extremely washy, but you want to get it to where it's got an even glossy sheen, and that it maintains that even glossy sheen on top as you start putting in your medium.
It's not going to dry while you work.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense. All right, Sally Parchman asked a question. I think I can help answer this one. How does sizing affect watercolor paper? If this has been answered, please ignore. I had to leave in the middle, but and Stuart, I'd like you to weigh in on this too. But there's 2 kinds of sizing. There's external sizing and internal sizing. They can be used separately or in combination. When you think of sizing on watercolor paper, if it's an external sizing, imagine a paint roller painting on the surface of a wall, and so they treat it with a chemical that helps. I think maybe you know how a paper towel will absorb ink if you touch ink to a paper towel? The sizing helps that not happen on watercolor paper, so
right.
so you don't get a spidering or a bleed effect on the paper. And if a paper is internally sized, it can have a similar effect, but it'll tend to be that you can use both sides of the paper, as I understand it. Maybe you know a little bit more, Stuart or Steve.
Yeah, the sizing affects just, to directly answer your question, it just affects how you can lift and move color, or how fast or how much the color is absorbed, or how much the paper stains. So a paper that absorbs your color right away and you can't do much with it. Some handmade papers are like this. I saw somebody in the comments earlier mention Cotty. I don't like Cotty very much myself. I mean, you can paint on it, but it's very, very absorbent and has, I don't think has enough sizing in it. Like Marty just said, it's kind of like painting on a paper towel. You wouldn't do that. I mean, that's the extreme example, would just go right into the paper. You wouldn't be able to do anything with it. It's just stained and it's there. So sizing helps you manipulate the color, and brands vary. You know, the more sizing it has, the more you'll be able to lift the color out. And if it's internally sized, as he said, you should be able to paint on both sides.
Any thoughts on that, Stuart? Have you ever sized your own paper?
Only a little bit, and it always seems like it's better when it's done professionally. But you can thin out some PVA and brush it onto a piece of paper and get an effect.
Okay.
Sometimes it might have a little too much sheen, but you know, if the paper's absorbent enough, it should absorb. I do work with hide glue, so sometimes you can brush a thin hide glue over the paper and just carry on. So it works. I've tried it. Sometimes I find if a paper is spongy, it might have like the Cartiera Magnani Anagoni paper. Mm-hmm. It's spongy at first, but after you get 1 or 2 rounds of color, then that color, the pigment in the gum arabic start creating almost the sizing itself, and you can really paint on top of that really nicely. So sometimes I wonder if you have a paper that just really seems weak on the size, if you get a few tones on it, then you might be painting on top of the pigment surface better and get less absorbency with the paper.
That's awesome.
Good.
Steve, do you want to throw in on that?
No, that's good. That's a good point. And I had never thought of actually trying to size yourself with PVA, but that might be excellent idea to try on some of these, especially like Cotty, which I again don't like.
Sure. Well, let me skip ahead.
But if you have some sheets sitting around, it might be worth experimenting.
Yeah, sure. I have a book. of it.
There you go.
I'm going to skip ahead a little here because we're going to run short on time here. We only have like a few minutes left. So I know Steve's got to do something, so I'm going to have to let him run shortly. But a few more questions, fine. Let's see. Can you repeat the Stonehenge Aqua block on the site? And it shows $15.95. Have they already applied the Steve and Marty discount? I don't know. You'll have to ask. Well, maybe you already answered this, Scott. I think Scott answered, so that's great. Question, is the B paper that Steve was asking about, B paper cold press 140-pound watercolor paper pad, is it 9-inch by 12-inch?
What I have isn't. It's 6 by 9. It came in a little loose sheet pack, and it is cold press. So I think you can get it on Amazon. You can get like a 50 sheet pack, and it's really, really reasonable. If you're looking for a practice paper that's reasonable, B is great, and it's 100% cotton. That's
okay. So we'll buzz through a few of these questions quick. Does Steve, Marty, or Stuart wax their watercolor paint? I should add the rest of that because I don't think any of the three of us actually wax. But do we wax our water?
Maybe we should, paint? Marty.
Well, you know what? Sure, I'll do it if you go, Steve. I'm not getting a Brazilian though, dude. I'm out. Ding, that's my stop. But do you do any waxing of your paper, Stuart?
No. I've never tried it.
And if so, why or why not?
I wouldn't know what the benefit would be. What would I get out of it that I can't do now? I don't know. I feel like I have a lot of options at my hands already.
I think what they're talking about is putting a finish on top. There are wax finishes.
Oh, when you're done.
Yeah, and actually Angela Fair has a pretty good video on how she does it. A lot of watercolorists now are trying the gallery wrap rather than framing, matting, and glassing. they're trying the open, like you would basically like you would hang an oil painting with the gallery wrap. And the way that you do that is you fix the watercolor, and then you can put. I would use an acrylic varnish, and I have some of that. And but some people are using a wax finish, and you pour it on, and you kind of rub it over, and it seals the whole thing out. I'm assuming that's what the person who asked the question is talking about. I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to experiment with it because I own some stuff that way.
I just can't help thinking about that scene at the end of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark when that dude melts, because he's getting hit by the rays of God.
Yeah.
I don't know what happens to the painting at the end of that, but maybe it's some kind of like weird and caustic combination. I'll paint.
Yeah, hopefully he was jarred up.
Yeah, that's right. Here's a few other questions for you guys. Where do you mention Marty and Steve on the wet paint order form online? Okay, I think never mind on that one because that was answered. Let's see. Question: what pencil graduation is best for sketching before starting a pencil? Not sure I understand what the graduation means.
The lightness of it, how to create a light drawing before you go into your heavier leads, I suppose.
Okay, sure. Stuart, do you want to address what you do there?
Oh, you could start out in a 2H or an F. I mean, a 2H is going to force you to draw light because if you try to draw dark, you're going to scar the paper, and you don't want to do that.
Yep.
So that would be a good start.
Yeah, and 2H and F are safe. Yeah, if you get HB, if you get B or above or softer, the graphite travels with the wash. And, if you don't mind that, that's fine. But usually you can go, it does a little bit with HB, but F or 2H, as Stuart said, you're usually safe, and your graphite won't travel with the wash any and gray your watercolor.
Scott, let me think about this. I was thinking, well, anyway, go out. You're right. Yeah. I mean, both Stuart and I go to the same art school from time to time. So it's the Art Academy in St. Paul, and a guy named Jim Robinson runs it. And one of Jim's sort of strict philosophies about doing things is always start light and try to make, like, what does he say, Stuart, 20 or 30 corrections? Count your corrections and make them, but do it with a light line so it's easy to erase.
I think it's knowing the difference between your structuring drawing, your ghosting, your sketching versus the finish.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's a different technique. I mean, some artists want to see the remnant lines, and that's a piece of that's an artistic approach all in itself. People want to see the line work. Like when I buy Stuart's work, I like to buy his unfinished or partially finished work because I like to see his process in the work. So it helps me, and I just love looking at it. So here's a couple more questions, and then we're going to wrap up, I promise. Do I need to put any kind of, and we get this question a lot, Mary, so thanks for asking it. Do I have to put any kind of finish on the watercolor painting to preserve the color? And we're probably talking about fixative or spray stuff like that. What do you guys do?
No, you do not need to. The only reason to put it on there is to protect it. If it's not going to be matted or framed or glassed, the most watercolor is put in a mat under glass. If you do that, you don't need anything. So no, just, sitting in a portfolio, whatever. However, with this new trend to kind of gallery wrap stuff and not matte or glass it, then you might want to consider some sort of protection. But, and the varnish that I'm going to try using is a UV varnish. So I don't know what Stuart does, but in general, as a practice, I don't spray or put anything on my watercolor.
Well, you, Stuart?
I am a fan of the matting and the glassing.
Yep.
I think works on paper look fantastic when they're properly matted and glazed.
And plus, you
and
make
use UV glass, UV protection glass.
And you make some beautiful frames, so the work jumps out if you do that. So I think that's all the time we have for questions tonight. I really appreciate it. Sorry if we didn't get to all your questions tonight. We'll try to do this again in some format. Things are always changing in the art world, and if you visit Steve's channel or my channel, we're always trying to keep up with testing things and experimenting. So I really appreciate you guys joining us tonight. If you didn't get a chance, I do want to make a couple of announcements and some reminders here. If you didn't get this earlier and you're just tuned in, or you're watching this weekend on replay, if you go to Wet Paint today and this weekend, and you use the special code Marty and Steve, you're going to get a heavily discounted Stonehenge Aqua 9x12 pack of Stonehenge Aqua. Now, you could get it in cold press or hot press. We've got one of the owners of Wet Paint in the chat room right now, Scott Ferris. He's a good friend of mine, and Scott's always trying to hook up our viewers with good deals and everything, and so generous to the people who help support the best little art store in the universe. And I know that because I travel wide and far, and so is Stuart. Stuart, you've been to every continent except for Antarctica, right?
Yeah, we got to see that art store up there to know for sure.
Right, but of the continents you visited, what is the best art store in the world?
Oh, easily Wet Paint.
Yeah, see, Steve, you recently came to visit relatives in Iowa, and the only thing that really broke your heart about that visit was what?
Not getting to visit Wet Paint.
Of course.
Yeah.
But if you go up to Wet Paint's website and you look for the Stonehenge Aqua and you order it and you mention Steve and Marty, you're going to get a heavy discount, and Scott is going to include a sample of the opposite paper that you get. So if you get a cold press, he's going to give you a sample of the hot press. This weekend only. It all ends Sunday night. If you don't get there now and you're watching this video somewhere in the future, the deal's off. Forget about it. You got to do it this weekend, as they say, to get the special deal. I want to thank my partner, Steve Mitchell, who is been so generous and giving of his time, and we've just had wonderful times collaborating. We're going to do it again soon. We got some special things in mind, right, Steve?
Yeah. We've got another thing planned. Be another artist that we'll feature, and we'll keep that under our hat for now, but it ought to be a lot of fun. So we'll be announcing that coming up not too distant future. But yeah, this is always a blast, Marty. Always a blast.
Yeah. And if you don't know about Steve, if you only know Steve from his YouTube channel, please go to Steve's website. I believe it's Steve Mitchell Design. And if you
Steve Mitchell Studio, SteveMitchellStudios.com.
SteveMitchellStudio.com. Go look at Steve's artistic practice. He's a wonderful fine artist and an incredible guy. I think you'll love his artwork. And I would like to say thank you very much to my good friend Stuart Lockridge, one of the generation's very best artists. In 100 years from now, when they're looking back on artists, they're going to look at Stuart's work and say, this guy was a genius. So get to know him now. Bump over to stuartlockridge.com. I put a link in the website. There will be one down in the description here. Check out his artwork. And don't forget to buy some artwork from an artist one of these days. There's nothing like owning an original piece of artwork from an artist. Steve, the other day, sent me a little art card with a hand-painted nature scene with some trees on it, and I absolutely cherish that. And of course, I think I have the largest collection of Stuart Lockridge prints. And Stuart, that's a lie, isn't it? There's some bigger collector than I am. But, if I could afford it, I would buy all of Stuart's stuff. And so go see Stuart. Any final words, Stuart?
Oh, thank you for having me on, Marty. Thank you. And Steve, it's really a pleasure to talk to you.
Very, very much enjoyed talking with you, Stuart.
And we'll have Stuart on again sometime in the future. And look, stay tuned this year for a documentary on Stuart Lockridge that I'm putting together, and they'll be featured both on YouTube and Patreon. You guys will be able to see that. Stuart's a fascinating guy on top of being a good artist. So we'll get to that soon. Thank you for everybody who joined. Thank you to Valerie Cannell of Drawing with Fire, who was generous enough to give us her time moderating the chat rooms. Thanks to Carol Boss from Hahnemuhle Paper who stopped by. And thank you to Scott Ferris, my good friend from Wet Paint, who spent time in the chat room tonight and was generous enough with his merchandise to provide just a fantastic deal. I'll put some details in the description as well. Steve, any last words before we cut you guys loose?
Nope. Echo my thanks to all those people. Thank you, Val. And just a real joy and a blast to do this and share, and look forward to doing it again soon.
See you guys soon. All right. This is Marty from owingsart.com, Steve and Stuart from Stuart Lockridge. And we'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.